Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of Wildlife Wednesday. It's everybody's favorite day. My name is Heather Crochetiere, and I am a senior specialist with WWF-Canada. And through my role, I get to lead a lot of really cool restoration projects across the country. You may have seen me do a couple other Wildlife Wednesdays where I was talking about turtles and joining our big cat expert for World Tigers Day. Today, we're celebrating another important day, and that's World Fish Migration Day. It technically was on Saturday, but we're keeping the celebration going. And that is a day to celebrate and raise awareness about the importance of free-flowing rivers and migratory fish. So that's why today we're going to be talking about one of the most famous migratory fish, Pacific salmon. One of the projects I lead is around restoration of salmon habitat in the Lower Fraser watershed in British Columbia. And this work started in 2019 through the WWF Restoration Fund, which is supported by Coca-Cola Canada. From that initial project, we've been able to continue to partner with Katzie First Nation, the Lower Fraser Fisheries Alliance, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and other local partners to restore important sites for salmon. And I'm so excited today to be joined by Ian Hamilton, who is a fisheries biologist with the Lower Fraser Fisheries Alliance. Welcome, Ian. Can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Morning, Heather. Morning, everybody. And I guess it's good afternoon from the West Coast. My name is Ian Hamilton. I'm a fisheries biologist, and I manage the Habitat Restoration Department of an organization known as the Lower Fraser Fisheries Alliance, short term known as the LFFA. And the LFFA is an organization that acts as a voice for First Nations of the Lower Fraser River. We work collaboratively and holistically with the Lower Fraser First Nations to manage the fishery and support cultural and spiritual traditions for not only this generation, but future generations as well. We provide communication support, fisheries management, and in particular, the department that I look after is focused primarily around habitat restoration, conservation, and stewardship. And for the viewers out there that don't know, we've been working with WWF-Canada and Coca-Cola for the last couple of years, working on restoration sites in the Upper Pitt River. The Pitt Lake itself is one of the first lake systems that comes off of the Fraser River when you head east from Vancouver. And the Upper Pitt region is still a healthy and functioning ecosystem up there that supports a number of stocks of Pacific salmon, which is obviously the focus of today's work. So that gives you a little bit of a background and an introduction to what I do and what the organization does and how it works with First Nations in the region in Canada. And I'm happy to be here with you today and provide any insight I can.
Amazing. We're happy to have you. So we know that salmon are important all the time, but why especially should we be talking to them on World Fish Migration Day?
When you talk about Pacific salmon in particular, you're talking about one of the keystone species in the ecosystems on the West Coast, and in particular, focus for our work in the Pacific Northwest. Salmon act as a food source for critical species such as killer whales and seals. They're also a very important food source for inland and terrestrial land animals like bears and wolves. And they act when they spawn and die, which is kind of morbid, but they act as a very important sort of fertilizer or ecosystem service from a nutrient standpoint to be able to provide a lot of the plants, insects, and bug populations with the necessary support to be able to sort of maintain healthy ecosystems. So when you talk about salmon, you're really talking about one of the pillars that supports a lot of the healthy ecosystems that you can see on the screen now and that are really associated with British Columbia, the province itself, and are a significant driver to maintaining the health of the ecosystems that everybody relies on.
Yeah, no kidding. Salmon are really, really important. And we know that they have a really long migration route. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, salmon are quite wild. When it comes to ocean migration, a lot of, as adults, when they're out at sea, the Fraser River stocks in particular are known to go as far across the sort of North Pacific Ocean to Russia and the east coast of Asia. And when it comes to migration route, not only do they have to cover that whole seascape area, but once they get back into the river mouth and start entering into the freshwater habitats, there's a major physiological or body shift they have to make from going from saltwater to freshwater. And then on top of that, some of these stocks will travel just shy of upwards of 1,400 kilometers. And that's just the freshwater side of things when they reach the mouth of the Fraser River to get back to the important spawning locations that they go to for the final spawning and end stage of their life. So when you talk about an animal that migrates and covers a major distance, I mean, salmon is definitely one of the iconic species that comes to mind.
Just a casual swim, a light jaunt, you know?
Come on, puts Michael Phelps to shame.
Yeah, no kidding. So we have been able to work together for the past couple of years, as you mentioned. How does the work that we're doing benefit salmon?
Well, that's a good question. For everybody out there, we've been working the last couple of years on a project that's led by Katzie First Nation in the Pitt system. As I mentioned, Pitt Lake is the first lake that you come to when you enter the Fraser River heading east from Vancouver. And the upper Pitt River is really kind of one of what I would consider one of the last remaining stands of the kind of Wild West. It's untouched. It's like a 45-minute drive from Vancouver, but it's still kind of off in the middle of remote landscape. And what we've been doing up there is really focusing on restoration methods for Chinook, for coho, and for sockeye salmon. And this could be anything from repairing landslides within spawning habitat to building protective, what we call bio walls or berms to protect spawning habitat from river runover or from the Pitt River, which jumps from side to side every year. This focuses on multiple species, as I mentioned. It's Chinook salmon, it's sockeye in some areas, it's coho, and the Pitt is still known as one of the strongholds in BC as a major important place for coho salmon. So a lot of what we've done takes on a variety of different techniques, whether that's stream restoration, whether that's rebuilding spawning channels, and really just trying to provide these fish as healthy an ecosystem as we can, and sort of almost turning back the clock to make sure that we provide these animals the critical habitat and healthy critical habitat that they require in order to complete their life cycle.
Yeah, and we're so excited to be a part of this project. It's one of our really exciting bodies of work. So it's really fantastic to be able to chat about it today. So some of the restoration work is around restoring spawning habitat. So a salmon that hatches in that spawning habitat, will they ever return to that spot?
Yeah, they will. Different species have different characteristics of how they go and how they live. Some salmon will stay in freshwater habitat after they emerge from their egg stage for upwards of a year or two. Other species will immediately sort of hatch and leave. But the key thing, and this is a behavior that you see in other species such as sea turtles, which I know you guys have focused previous episodes on. And recently in academia, they're starting to see the same thing in sharks, is what's called natal homing, or the ability of an animal to leave its home ground. And in the case of Pacific salmon, that can be for 3 or 4 years at a time and make these massive ocean migrations and then return back to almost the exact creek within the exact same ecosystem that they were born in order to spawn and end their life cycle. So making sure that we have healthy ecosystems for them when they're there is critical. And from a First Nations standpoint, a lot of the First Nations, especially in the Lower Fraser, they don't look at salmon as fish. Salmon are considered a family member. And the key is making sure that there's somewhere for them to come back to. There's been a lot of landscape alteration and human development at times gets in the way of this, but it's critical to make sure not only do we have a place for some of these fish to develop in their first year or two of life, but a very healthy ecosystem for these fish to return back to after they've made these, wild, expansive migrations out into the ocean, and then these, hundreds and thousands of kilometer trips back to these spawning areas. They need to have a healthy system to come back to, and that's really been the focus of our work so far.
Yeah, no kidding. How do they know how to get back to that same spawning ground?
It's a good question. The thing with fish is you're never 100% certain, but there's a couple theories out there. The first one is that salmon will follow the Earth's magnetic field. And this is something that birds will do, something that other fish species will do. They'll follow sort of the magnetic impulses put off by the planet and the magnetic field as sort of a navigation or sort of compass beacon to be able to allow them to come back. The other one is the sense of smell. One of the key things for sea turtles when they hatch is giving them the opportunity to actually smell the beach that they're hatched on, because they take the chemical signature or the smell of that beach, and that's what they use to sort of find their way home. Whether salmon do this is is debatable, but it's definitely one of the things, given they have a very keen sense of smell and a very keen anatomy to pick up sort of small variations and changes in the environment to get back to. But those are two of the main sort of theories as to how these animals navigate back to within such a small area from where they were born.
That's so cool. They just follow their nose.
Yeah, quite literally.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to ask one more question and then we're going to open it up to the audience. So if you have questions for Ian, do put it in the chat. How many species of Pacific salmon are there?
When it comes to salmon management, especially in BC, technically there are 5. However, there is a 6th. The 5 that people know are Chinook, Coho, Chum, Sockeye, and Pink. And those are the sort of 5 main, at least when it comes to management of fisheries and stocks, those are the 5 main species that people know. There's the 6th one, and take note of this for those of you that are chiming in today. The 6th one is known as steelhead, and a lot of people will know steelhead in their sort of freshwater phase as rainbow trout. But steelhead are actually rainbow trout that have a life history similar to salmon in that they will leave the lakes or freshwater river systems and head out to ocean, much like salmon do, much like the other 5 species that I mentioned before. So when it comes to management, there's 5, but technically there really are kind of 6.
Okay. It's often a lot more complicated than we realize at first glance,
Yeah, and animals are very complex, and so is management. So yeah, it's definitely something to look into, but 5 or 6 are generally the accepted in BC.
Nice. Okay, we're getting some great questions in the chat, so let's go to there. We have a question from Emily, who is wondering, what does salmon eat?
The salmon, as sort of smaller juveniles, a lot of times will rely on bugs or insects that either grow and live in the freshwater streams, or sometimes the larvae or undeveloped insects that fall from trees or some of the habitats that are required in the freshwater ecosystems, which is why maintaining healthy ecosystems in streamside, or what's known as riparian habitat, is so critical, because it helps the development of the juveniles. As adults, salmon become predatory on primarily other species of fish. They'll sometimes forage on other things if they can find them, but that tends to be the mainstay of their diets.
Okay, and you touched on this a little bit, but what kind of habitat? Victoria is wondering, what kind of habitat do young salmon need to grow and thrive in freshwater?
That's a good question. Hi, Victoria. Victoria's a friend of mine from grad school. Young salmon require stream systems that are still sort of, you look at them in terms of that iconic look of what you'd find from a stream photo or image from BC. That means they need healthy streamside systems to provide food. They need adequate flow, so enough water coming down there that they can survive. They also need important factors of water quality. So the stream temperatures need to be cold, and there needs to be adequate oxygen in the water, which I know is crazy, but fish still actually require oxygen in water. It's just dissolved in the water, and a lack of contamination. So no chemicals, no kind of toxins that would be in there. And really, when it comes to stream restoration, those are the key factors you're looking at, is maintaining as healthy an ecosystem as you can, and using the word natural as best as you can as sort of a marker to shoot for, is those sort of healthy stream systems that you see with trees hanging over and vegetation on the side, and a lot of those graveled areas for the fish to be able to hide in or stay in. So those are a few of the factors you'd want to consider.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Okay, I think it's time for some trivia. It's everybody's favorite part of Wildlife Wednesday. So do feel free to play along in the chat, put your answers in. Let's head to the first question. Okay, first question. How many species of Pacific salmon are there? Ooh, okay, let's see if folks were listening.
Yeah, this is the tricky one. We'll accept one of 2 answers, and I won't give it away, but there is a little bit of arbitrariness in this.
Yep. We'll give folks a bonus point too if they manage to get both answers. I mean, we're not keeping score, but It's always nice to get the bragging rights, eh?
Definitely.
Okay, feel free to put your answers in the chat. We have, oh, Jacqueline says 5, but 6 if you include the steelhead. We have,
I think you're in there.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, yeah, exactly. 5 or 6 if you count steelhead. So great answers. 5 is right, 6 is right. If you got both, bonus points for you. Nice job. Okay. Like 1 secret 6th. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. What is the smallest Pacific salmon species? So, we
That's a
didn't
good
actually
one.
say this. Yeah.
No, we didn't. But think color.
If folks can think back to the 5 salmon species or 6 salmon species that we listed, take a guess. Let's see.
Yeah, I'll give you a little hint. This species is also known as a humpy.
Interesting. Jacqueline's guessing sockeye. See if we have some other guesses coming in. The answer is the pink salmon. That one was tough because we didn't actually say it. See if there's any salmon experts in the audience. Okay, heading to the next question. This is a true or false question. Adult salmon do not eat once they've returned to freshwater to spawn. We talked about how long that migration is once they reach freshwater. What do you think? Do they eat or not?
Well, salmon do a couple of things that will give you a hint for this one. They change color when they get into freshwater. Each species changes slightly different from that silvery shade you see out of the ocean, but they also change their body shape. So a lot of spawning salmon you'll see have changes in their jaws and changes in their sort of mouth anatomy. So if you've got big jaws, it may or may not be easy to eat, but we'll see.
Let's see. The answer is that's true. That means they can go up to 6 months without eating.
Yeah, I don't know how they do that. I would be kicked out of my house for being extremely grumpy if I went that long without eating.
I would be grumpy if I went 6 hours without eating, never mind 6 months. Salmon are incredible. All right. Last question. Which of these is not a species of salmon? Is it Chinook, coho, blue, or sockeye? This is another one that we did talk about. So let's see if folks were listening.
Yeah, and for those of you that don't necessarily know the answer, don't get too depressed if you don't get this.
Let's see. Let's see what we got. We got, oh, Cawthor's guessing blue. That's probably a pretty good guess. The answer is blue. Awesome. Awesome job, guys. I want to go back. There's a couple other great questions in the chat that we wanted to talk about. So we have one from Leeks, who is wondering, what do we see as the main contributors to declining populations of salmon?
That's a good question. Hi, Lika. That's debatable depending on who you talk to. There's the landscape in the Fraser River in the West Coast in BC is extremely complex, and the answer varies depending on who you speak to. From my standpoint, and again, I can be slightly biased in this, but I think one of the major drivers, and maybe not the major, but one of the very key points to consider is loss of habitat. If you look at a map of Vancouver and the surrounding Lower Mainland, you'll notice that there's an extensive amount of commercial, residential, city development, and in particular, there's a ton of agriculture. And those are all, very important key things for human development. But unfortunately, human development and salmon productivity aren't necessarily things that always go hand in hand. And with the constant and ever-growing developmental pressures that are put on the area around here in BC, I think what we're starting to see is a degradation or a loss of key habitat. both in size and in habitat quality. The areas are being straightened, or the water is being taken, or you're seeing changes in the way that the streams naturally move and shift. And salmon are very sort of resilient, but they're also sensitive to environmental change. So again, from my standpoint, being slightly biased on the habitat and restoration side of things, I think what you're seeing is a decline that in a lot of cases, at least on the inland and the freshwater side of things, is driven by a loss of habitat.
Yeah, and again, that's one of the reasons why, or kind of the main reason why, we're so excited to be supporting Katzie First Nation and working together to restore some of that important habitat. And we'll do one more question from Derek. Derek is wondering if there's a common bad habit that consumers engage in that is harmful to salmon habitats.
A common bad habit. That's a good question. I mean, there's a number of bad habits that humans have. I think that the one thing that comes from it is development or use of land without a conservation mindset or a consideration for the animals that rely on that. And that's not anyone in particular. I think that's a very human trait. A lot of times human are very sort of human centric, and there's not the necessary focus or need to look at conservation as a major pillar of our development and the way that we live to the level that it needs to be. When we develop, or when we make city plans, or when we expand, and when urbanization takes over, I think there needs to be a much higher consideration for environmental processes that support a lot of, not just salmon, but a lot of the other animals, bears and wolves and caribou and all the animals that rely on that, because they've been relying on that land for far longer than we've been around. And I think that's probably one of the major oversights, and something that we're working to try and change. But that change sort of needs to happen now, and that's something that I think that taking from the First Nations is a fantastic way of looking at it, because their cultures are based in stewardship and conservation. And I think that really provides a guiding beacon as to how we can better manage and plan to be able to take into consideration other organisms that rely on these ecosystems other than just humans.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that is a great place to wrap up this edition of Wildlife Wednesday. Ian, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thanks for everybody for the questions. Thanks for having me today. It's been a blast, and I wish you guys all the best.
Thank you. And don't forget, if you have species that you want to hear about on an upcoming Wildlife Wednesday, feel free to put them in the comments, and be sure to tune in next time. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.